Have you ever thought about remodeling your home instead of buying a new one? My guest today is Scott West, who is the owner of West Construction, and they specialize in building beautiful custom homes from the ground up, but also renovation. And in fact, he's been finding that his firm has been doing more renovation now than ever. My prediction in the Arizona real estate market is with rising housing prices that renovation is going to become the key word for 2025. So I sure hope you enjoy hearing from Scott West right here. Scott, thanks for joining me today. So we had coffee a couple weeks ago and we started chatting about renovation, and we cooked up this idea that we should be doing a podcast to talk about one of the biggest trends in Arizona right now, which is renovation. So I'm excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having us. I really appreciate it.
So before we start, we should let everybody know how we know each other. So your dad started West Construction about 4 decades ago.
Yeah, we're coming up on 40 years.
40 years. I mean, time flies, right?
It's crazy how fast it goes.
So now you're leading this company. Tell me a little bit about what things look like on a day-to-day basis, the kind of projects that you take on.
Sure. So right now, I would say about 80% of the work we're doing is actually renovations, remodels, additions to existing houses, and about 20% are actually new houses. And in that 20%, most of those are actually scrape and rebuild on existing lots that had previous homes on them.
And are there particular areas of town that you feel like are ripe for renovation?
Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, areas that there's really not additional dirt coming online. We're getting into a lot of cases where Arizona is getting built out in Maricopa County. You know, we're having to go further and further out for fresh dirt or fresh development. So Paradise Valley is a perfect example. I mean, there is no more dirt out there. So if you want a new house in Paradise Valley, you either have to buy something that's already done and renovate it, or you have to buy something, scrape it, and start over.
Yep. Those are the only options. We were having fun talking the other day about how prices have changed, like how land, the cost of land, like if we go back about 10 years, what were we seeing then that we're not seeing today?
Yeah, so a lot in Paradise Valley you could easily get 10 years ago for 800, 900, a million for really good lots and prime areas of Paradise Valley. Now we're seeing kind of secondary areas of Paradise Valley that used to be not what they considered, the prime areas, going for, upwards of 2 million plus, in some cases 3 million. And so it starts to, as a homeowner, it starts to make you think, okay, am I better off to renovate what's here and change it to be more of what I want, or do I build new? And so these are the conversations we're constantly happening with builders, architects, and we're all kind of putting our heads together for that client based on what their needs and wants are. So it leads to some interesting discussions in terms of when you're talking costs and the pluses and minuses and some of the pitfalls of renovating versus going new. And so it opens up a whole new line of dialogue that really 10 years ago, a lot of people would just scrape the house and automatically start over.
Yep.
So.
It's interesting because we were also chatting about, I've got a couple different sets of friends that have been house hunting and maybe looking at taking a really large house and they want to downsize. So they want to be living a smaller life, and they're having a hard time getting their hands around the fact that they're going to sell their large house that probably needs to be renovated. And so maybe they're not going to get the highest dollar for that, but in buying their brand new house, they're kind of spending the same amount of money to get either less land or less house. It's really hard for our clients to get their heads around this, isn't it?
It is. It's a crazy dynamic that really in Phoenix, metro, we've never had before.
Yeah.
There was always this defined line that you knew, okay, it made more sense to go this route or this route based on what you wanted. Whereas now what we're finding, and this is the conversation we're having with a lot of our clientele, we've been around long enough that we've built these houses in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that, where people have lived there that long. And we've gone in, we've done some minor remodeling, and now they're either retired or retiring, or all their kids are out of the house, and it's a different family dynamic. And so they're looking at, okay, I've got an 8,000 square foot house, and really my wife and I only need 4, or we only want 5. And it's like, okay, I'm leaving a house that I could sell for, call it 4 million, that needs to be completely redone, that was built in the 80s or 90s, and to build a 5,000 square foot house now at 600 or 700 or $800 a foot, which is what we're commonly seeing. A well-built house, but maybe not to the nines or tens and finishes. Most of our homes these days that are on that, what I can call a conservative build are in that $600 to $900 range. And on the ones with a lot more amenities, it is not uncommon to see $1,000, $1,200 a square foot. So now you start looking at, like you said, you sell for $5,000, and then you build a smaller house, and you spent as much or more than what you got for that previous home on acreage, larger home. And so it starts to bring up additional questions, like we were talking about. Okay, I'm into this house for $2 million, or $2.5 million total, and I'm only going to get $5 for it, and it's going to cost me that or more to build my new house. Am I better off to spend $1 million or $1.5 million renovating this house and just live here? And so these are the conversations we commonly have these days. And one of the first things I say when somebody says, hey, we want to do some stuff to sell the house, is, where are you going? Have you identified that yet? Because it is. I mean, it's the market is getting healthier. There's more units on the MLS, and more for people to buy if they want to buy new. But the flip side is, have you identified and seen kind of what that looks like? And we had this conversation here a couple of years ago with one of our long-term clients that we've done stuff for, and the decision they made was, it makes more sense to go ahead and have you guys come in and do some stuff. We want to do this house and continue to live here, just because the alternative, the great views in Scottsdale or Paradise Valley, is going to cost me more than where I'm currently at. And if I spend $1.5 million, or I spend $500,000, or I spend whatever, I'm still ahead of the game.
Yep. And location, right?
Exactly.
So some of these houses are located right in the heart of Paradise Valley, very convenient to absolutely everything. When you go to build your new house, you've kind of got to get to the fringe of Paradise Valley. Maybe you're leaving Paradise Valley because you're looking for land, because land is so impossible to find. Which we were talking, you said you're looking for land, and my answer to you is everybody's looking for land.
Everybody is.
Yeah. So I really feel, and Mark Candelaria says this a lot, and I know you do a lot of work for him as well. He has said, there is 20 or 30 years of work in Paradise Valley because of the number of homes that need to be renovated, the number of homes that need to be updated, the homes that, need, different structure, different exterior, all of that, and that there's just so much work there. And so I really feel like, for all the incredible custom home builders, which you are one, who are all here in Arizona, who are building these great projects, I feel like renovation is going to be like the name of the game. Like, for the next 10 years, it feels like, if you've got a great house that you love and you want to move because you want something different, can you make your current house something different?
And a lot of the houses, the theory, and really the way people live now is more, I'd say, indoor outdoor, whereas back in the 90s you had less open floor plans. A lot of the house ceilings still were really tall, but they're different. And so as we're seeing with in your magazine, for instance, some of these big door systems that go on out of the great room into the back patios, we're able to retrofit those onto what I call previous generation of homes, because as pretty much every decade, the style or the use of the home, people use the homes a little bit differently, and that continues to adapt. You have this huge potential there, where these dated homes can be brought up to current standards. They have good bones.
Right.
It's just usually a matter of, okay, what is the homeowner, what's their goal?
Right.
And it always starts with that conversation of, Mr. Homeowner or Mrs. Homeowner, what is it that you're looking to do? What is it your ultimate goal is? Do you want that indoor-outdoor feel? Are you looking to take, because some of the older houses tended to be really separated with a lot of interior walls. Are you trying to kind of pull that out and open things up more? Are you looking to take the dark colors. A lot of the older houses in the 90s especially had a lot of those dark colors,
Yep.
heavy looking stone, heavier looking cabinets, or they had, in some cases, remember the old whitewashes
Oh
that were
my
on
gosh.
cabinets?
I mean, I don't, I have not seen those for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of houses that
Yeah.
are out there that still have that type of stuff. Okay. So is it just a matter of refinishing cabinets and doing countertops and new plumbing fixtures, or are we going back to studs in certain areas of the house and starting over essentially?
Well, this also goes to the other thing that you and I were talking about, which is having a plan. So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I've decided I don't want to move. I want to renovate my current home. I just want to open up the main living areas to the outdoor. Just like you said, I want to have this expansive glass. So when somebody says they want to do that, okay, that's one scope of work. But then once you get started, when they then say, oh, and then we also want to put beams in the ceiling and we should change the flooring and paint it. Now, I could probably use different baseboards, and as long as it's different baseboards, maybe different doors, and not that crazy about the plumbing. Now, you love to go into a project when somebody figures out the whole project up front. Like these renovation projects, they sort of grow on you, right? Well,
do.
so long as we're doing this, maybe we should do this. Well, maybe we should have decided that at the beginning for the ultimate cost effective. So how do you have that conversation with your clients, and what is the best way to think about a renovation?
So one of the first things I usually tell clients thinking about doing a renovation or a remodel is that the most dangerous phrase in that category is while we're at it.
Oh, yeah.
And that usually comes in,
Yeah.
about halfway through the project when everything's demoed and you're starting to put everything together. And then they go, well, while we're at it, what if we do this? Well, that adds cost. It always costs more to do that midstream than to have planned for it in the beginning, because it usually affects multiple trades: framing, plumbing, electrical, tile, wood floor. And so that adds time too to the project.
Right.
So the more times you say while we're at it, and let's say you have an expectation that this remodel is going to take 14 months, the while we're at it, next thing you know, I've added 4 months to the project line, and sometimes homeowners become less than happy with that. The other thing that everybody has to keep in mind too is sometimes we peel back the layers of an onion, the old saying, and you find that the next layer isn't as good as you thought it was, and so you end up having to dig further into it to put everything back together. The important thing to know, though, is if you've already planned to rewire the house for today's AV, TVs, home theater, surround sound, speakers throughout the house, automation, stuff like that, when you go in pre-planning for it, you've already decided you're rewiring essentially the house. Same thing on the electrical side. If you're doing lighting control and you're doing some of that stuff, you're essentially rewiring the house. So knowing that going in versus thinking you're going to reuse stuff, that affects not only the timeline but the cost perspective. Right. Because when you get those surprises midstream, we're like, oh, actually we want to take a house that's all switches, and you're getting to the point where you're putting cans up and they go, actually now we want to do automation. What a lot of people don't realize is that all of those switch legs that were at that location, if you want to hardwire them, which is the most reliable way to do it, you're essentially rewiring all of the electrical back to a central location where those processors are that process the commands that say, okay, you can do a scene, right? Like you've seen a lot of these houses where you press, welcome, and certain lights come on throughout the house.
Yeah.
That's a totally different animal than just changing can locations and leaving them on a decor or rocker switch in that room. So not only is it a cost perspective, it's a time perspective. And so pre-planning, knowing what wood floor, what tile, and everything else is important as knowing what you're going to do for those types of situations, for decorative lighting, for general lighting, for any type of automation. So it's not only cost, it's a time. It also helps because the subs are pre-planning for already knowing to do that. So they're already geared up knowing they're going to have to go through and rewire versus just, it can literally make the difference of 4 weeks worth of work versus 12 weeks worth of work. So that plays into it. And then in terms of the finishes, like we're all seeing, a lot of the finishes, manufacturers are constantly still, since 2020, to us in the field at least, it feels like manufacturers are discontinuing more items during the process of construction than the previous 5 to 10 years before it. So even from 2008, when the market essentially crashed, to 2020, you had a fairly high likelihood that the stuff that was selected was going to be available a year down the line when you needed to order it for,
Right.
sub X.
So why is that? Why are materials not as available as they used to be?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. We've seen over the last 20 years a lot more materials are made elsewhere. Like granite slabs, stuff like that have always come from other places for the
Right.
most part. Porcelain tiles, wallpapers, wood floors, stuff like that. Wood floors used to be site finished. So we get the raw materials on, site finish them now. Now most of the trend is engineered hardwood flooring. So most of those are made elsewhere, Asia in specific. So what happens is I think factories change, and the not only the wood floor manufacturers change factories, especially now with I hate to say this, but a lot of things are moving out of the China region and moving to like Vietnam, Thailand, a lot of other places. So I think some of it has to do with that transition to production, but I think also trends have been changing more rapidly too.
Yeah.
And so as a result, the manufacturers are changing. And so what we get caught with is we don't always get notification that's happening. And neither do the
Right.
designers. It's probably one of the biggest frustration for the design team as well as the building team is that we go to order it, several months before we need it because we don't want to have it sitting on site. We want it more of a just-in-time type production.
Right.
And they say, well, that's been discontinued as of a week ago. And oh, by the way, we only have 4,000 square feet left in inventory and you need 6. And it's like, well,
Right.
back to the drawing board.
Right.
And then this leads to, and this is true on new build and remodeling. So it leads to frustrations on the homeowner's part a lot of times because they don't understand how or why the stuff wouldn't be ordered right in the very get-go. And to some extent, when 2020 happened, we were trying to order stuff earlier because we knew the long lead times. But what also happened is the manufacturers that used to store stuff for us for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, now you have like 2 weeks to when it comes in stock, and you've got to get it out the door, or you've got 1 month. And so when we have to transfer it to a third party holding facility that's air conditioned, because things like wood floors and
Right.
stuff like that can't be in our heat, it destroys them.
Right.
So you put them in those facilities, and now all of a sudden it's $600 a month for a pallet, and you've got 5 pallets. It adds up quick. And these are costs that the builder, the design team, the homeowner, nobody expects. And so
Right.
we're trying to balance homeowners' cost with making sure our materials are available.
Right.
So it's a fine
Well,
line.
I feel like some people say that building a house from scratch is sometimes easier than renovation because with renovation, when you're building brand new, you just go in order. You know what you need. You've got to get the foundation down first, or whatever goes first, land prep. So there's a whole timeline that goes with that. But with renovation, you've just got multiple things happening at multiple times, and until you open up a house, you don't really know what's happening inside of it. If there's issues or if there's things that you didn't expect. I mean, isn't there always something you didn't expect?
Basically, in a renovation, you figure the unexpected is expected.
Yeah.
So like we've been doing, like ever since I was a little kid, we've done a lot of remodeling. We just always have. I mean, it used to be more of a 50-50 mix. Now, like I said, it's kind of gone more of that 80-20. But so our subs and us, we've been around. We've seen stuff in PV. We've seen the stuff in Scottsdale, everything from McCormick Ranch to Scottsdale Ranch to Old Town Scottsdale. You start to get kind of an idea in certain areas, like, okay, this particular area is going to have cast iron piping, for instance. And so when you bid it, you go in knowing, okay, there's a high likelihood, even though I see it's been remodeled at some point, there's probably a big chunk of that cast iron that's still in place. And so you try to account for that in the bid. A lot of guys don't do that. That's what we do. And it's because we're trying to give the homeowner a realistic expectation of cost and time based on our years of experience versus the guy that's just trying to get the job or trying to promise something that they realistically won't be able to deliver.
Right.
So it kind of starts with realistic expectations. But yes, from the standpoint of a new build is really easy because you're starting from scratch. So it's real simple. It's you're fully replumbing. You're doing all new concrete. You're doing all new framing or masonry or ICF block or whatever construction method the homeowner's chosen.
Yeah.
Whereas on remodeling, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
so one of the things I like to say is I don't have X-ray vision, but I have a good idea of what's probably here based on project X. And so we try hard to kind of predict some of the unpredictable.
Yeah.
And then, there's always a healthy contingency line item. And that's for some of the stuff when we're reconstructing and something doesn't work out the way it is because of an existing condition. Instead of bugging the homeowner for, every little change order, we're able to absorb some of those costs at our discretion to make sure it's done right or
Right.
fix certain things.
Right.
We have a project, right now where everybody expected one thing, and we found out the house was something completely different. We knew it had had multiple additions done to it and remodels, since at least the 70s. And when we dug into there, we cambered all the sewer lines, checked everything. Everything was ABS, had been brought up to a more recent, 70s plus on waste lines. What we couldn't predict is that when we moved the plumbing, went to put it back under test, for code compliance reasons and for inspection, that either it wasn't glued properly from the get-go or there was a bad batch at that period when this house was done, and all the pipe fittings kept coming apart. So there's just stuff like that sometimes you just don't have a way to predict that type of thing.
Right.
But you have to fix it in order to move forward.
Yep, totally. You have to fix it to move forward. I think I told you I renovated a house in PV at the beginning of 2000. And one of the, we were doing something with a wall and we broke into something and we found exterior wall inside the wall of the primary bedroom. So obviously that primary bedroom got added later. So you didn't necessarily know that when I bought the house. Well, then that meant a whole host of other things went along with that one discovery of what was actually happening. So it's kind of what makes renovation a different beast. But, the reason I was excited to do this podcast today is I feel like Iconic Life has been telling the story of new houses so well and so much and so often, everything's brand new. And I feel like this next chapter is going to be a lot of really wonderful renovation stories. And these renovation stories are, there's kind of two storylines that go with this. One, the house goes from this to this, but then, what were the challenges that got solved in getting the house from here to here?
And that's a great lead into kind of the next thing that we have to deal with in renovation is you run into problems. It's true of new builds or remodeling. Remodeling tends to be more behind the scene problems the homeowner doesn't know.
Right.
And those are the types of things that essentially we put our heads together with the subcontractors, develop solutions, and then present them to the architect and homeowner and designer as, okay, here's what we've got. Here are the paths forward that'll work with scenario X.
Yeah.
What would you guys like to do? And then a lot of times that comes with, okay, cost A, B, C too, because there's usually different costs to it.
Right.
And the other thing we run into is you run into code compliance. So what a lot of people don't realize is as soon as you enter into renovation, and these aren't reasons to dissuade people, it's just things you need to know up front.
Right.
But when you're renovating a home, the codes have changed.
Right.
So you're expected, if you touch area X, you must bring the house up to current code. And that can, if it's a safety type issue, the entire house has to be brought up. So ground fault, interruption, outlets.
Yep.
There's they have the breakers are different now. They have basically new standards for all the breakers in the breaker box. So you have to change sometimes the breakers. You've got to go through and add smoke detectors. You've got to sometimes add fire sprinklers.
Right.
And a lot of the houses in PV and Scottsdale didn't have them back then.
Right.
But is now required. And if you hit certain thresholds, and this is where working with your architect and builder, you can kind of navigate the system to try to not have to retrofit, in certain cases. But you do have to bring things up to that standard, and it's actually fun too, because you're basically taking something that you're given and you're turning it into something that nobody ever intended for it to be back when they built it.
Right. Well, and it is fun because then you're bringing all these new things to the table, and there's always a couple little fun surprises in there too. So one of the things I was really excited about doing this podcast is to answer the question, for a lot of these listeners, should I stay or should I go? Should I stay in my house and renovate it, or should I sell it and start all over again from scratch, and build something new? And I think for a lot of people, the idea of staying in their house, again, for what we talked about, great location is wonderful. Staying in their house is very attractive. They can figure it out. So one of the things we've been watching since 2020 was the cost per square foot of homes sold on the rise. So I remember in 2020, it was a little bit record breaking to be at about $1,000 a foot to $1,100 a foot for a brand new house. Okay, now we're taking a look at some of those cost per square foots are getting to be in like 16, 17,
2,000.
$1,800, $2,000 per square foot.
Starting to see people knocking on that 2,000 or more door.
Yeah, so that's a lot of growth and expense from just 5 years ago. So that's pretty remarkable. In the land of renovation, you've already got an existing structure. There's a foundation down, there's a house up. What are those costs per square foot? What did they look like in 2020? What are they today? And I asked this question knowing that the caveat is, well, Renee, what kind of floor is it? What kind of countertops are they? Let's say really nice luxury finishes that are not not the break the bank stuff, but the nice finishes that your clients typically like to see. What are some of those costs per square foot?
So to give you an idea, in 2020 into 2021, we finished a very nice home in Paradise Valley, and costs were $425 to about $550 a foot was pretty average. That same house, if we were to build it today, would be like $875 a foot. To probably $925 a foot. On renovating, you saw people spending $500,000 to $1 million back then. Now people are spending $2 to $4 million doing a very in-depth remodel, whereas that used to be, like I said,
a whole house, yeah,
a whole house. I mean, you see kind of the cost rise, and that's associated with labor as much as it is material cost. I mean, drywall in 1 year almost doubled in price, like from 2020 on, like in 1 year, and they've continued to go up. So there are different. So the caveat with the asterisk, right, is that typically people spend on a remodel not less than $200 a foot, because they're typically replacing all the flooring in the house,
right?
Countertops, some plumbing fixtures.
Yep.
When you start getting into wiring, drywall, retrofitting better insulation, because that's what a lot of we're finding on these remodels is people are actually having us pull all the drywall off to update the insulation and exterior windows, because we can get a lot more energy efficiency.
Right. Yeah.
So in the long term, it's going to save them quite a bit of money on their power bills and efficiency of the home. But window packages, a really nice window package back in 2020 was $125 to $150,000. It's $275 to $450 now, like depending on how much glass and what brand, and are there radius walls? It can vary wildly at this point. Can you still get a nice $150,000 window package? Yes, but they're going to be more basic. You're not going to have the giant, 12-foot tall, 20-foot long pocketing door.
Right.
You're not going to have some of those types of features. That's when you start getting into the 250, 300,000, you start to get some of these big door systems.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And maybe that's where somebody wants to spend their money. So if there is there a formula? So in Paradise Valley, I think most of the people listening to this podcast know that Paradise Valley is only 1 acre lots or larger. When you move to Scottsdale, you can end up with a 1/4 acre, half acre, whatever, variable in size. So if we're talking just in Paradise Valley, if you're going to buy a 1 acre lot, and if you're going to pay the price that you're going to pay today for your 1 acre lot, is there some conversation about what the value of the home should be on that lot? And let's say you're renovating. So funny little story, I'm always out looking at real estate, and when I think about buying things, or when I was looking for my house in Paradise Valley, what I really wanted was I wanted the oldest, crustiest house I could find, the one that looked like it was going to fall apart, because I knew I was going to renovate it. So don't give me something all beautiful, because I want a lot of new things in this house. So better to take the house that needs all the new things than the house that has the new things and get different new things. A little bit more sensitivity to the environment in that. But for somebody who's looking at a 1 acre lot in Paradise Valley, and then they're going to pay the price for that lot, is there a formula that says what the ultimate home value should be? So say you buy that lot and you buy it with the let's just say this lovingly, the cruddy little house, because there still are a few of
The
those.
60s,
Yeah, the
the original
1960s,
60s.
little tiny, that's really, desperately in need of every bit of love you can give it. If you buy that, what do you need to put on that lot when you renovate? I mean, you want to end up with a house of a certain caliber or size to make it worth the investment.
So that's where I think a lot of times having your realtor help you say, okay, if you build a 7,000 square foot house with today's Paradise Valley standard, it is a $8 million house or it's a $10 million house. That's where that feedback from a good real estate resource,
Right.
we all know that the big names, the Frank Azamis and all throughout Paradise Valley. There are several good guys, and Adrian Heyman. There are a bunch of good guys in PV that can help answer that type of question, and then sometimes we help back into it. So if you're getting a call it crusty 60s house, you have to kind of look at sometimes if it's one of these 2,000 square foot ranch style or 3,000 square foot ranch style 60s houses. Sometimes the best option is to actually scrape that house because essentially you're paying for the dirt.
Right, exactly. I guess that's what I was going to say, because you're going to buy that little house, but you're really paying for that 1 acre lot, for the dirt. And so then once you do that, even if you use part of that house or if you scrape the house, whatever's going to happen there, how do you figure out what that value should be? So obviously consult a real estate advisor.
A real estate professional who you know and trust, or if you don't know and trust somebody, ask for a referral from the builder or from an architect that you're working. Call you guys, and you guys can you guys could refer some of the top guys that just know the market. I mean, there is value in knowing the market, because as a homeowner, you need to know that you're not overbuilding, like you said, for that street. You don't want to build a $15 million house on a street that only supports 8.
Right.
Unless you're planning on, I hate to say this, staying there till you die, and it's somebody else's problem at that point.
Right.
And we do have clients that do that.
Yeah.
And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But also if you're looking in Paradise Valley or Scottsdale, one of the things you need to consider, McCormick Ranch is a hot area. Arcadia is a hot area. There's parts of Scottsdale, Phoenix that are Arcadia. You need to consider the same thing that you're talking about. What is the dollar figure ultimately that when I'm said and done that I can be okay at?
Yeah.
And then part of it is sometimes it's a good idea if you're under contract to hire a builder who knows, construction and knows remodeling, and have the conversation while you're in your inspection period to say, these are the things that we want to do to the house. Can you give us just a ballpark or an idea, time frame, cost wise, what is it today?
Right.
To help me make my decision on this, if this makes sense for my family.
Right.
So that's one thing. The next thing that I would say is also, if you're looking specifically to buy a house to renovate, having that same type of conversation, but also having that conversation with your realtor. Because it changes the dynamic of what you're looking for. So you're looking now, if you want to renovate a house, now you're looking for something that's probably built late 80s through early 2000s.
Right.
That maybe the floor plan doesn't 100% work, but the overall size works pretty close. If you're looking for a 6,000 square foot house and you find a 5,500 square foot house, you could do a 500 square foot addition and rework the floor space as long as the floor plan works pretty well. There are some very good floor plans that were built in that time period. We built some, a few of our great competitors have built some, and they're good houses. They're good bones. Everything's good about the house. It's just they need to be updated to today's standards. So, so hopefully that helps answer that question.
So as far as if we wanted to make this into the user-friendly guide of contemplating the do you stare, do you go, could you sum it up in 3 points of 3 of the most important things you need to consider before you make this decision?
So number one is look at what's out there. Where are you going to go? So what are your, okay, here are my top 3 things that this new place has to have. Is it the view? Is it the location? Is it a certain size? Figure out what that is, and then go actually look and see what's out there. Can you find something that is going to work for you? So that's the first thing to look at. Second point to look at is, okay, what is the market for the house that I have currently, and what would I need to do to it to sell it in a timely fashion.
Right.
Third thing is okay, if I don't want to do, if A and B don't work, okay, what's C? Well, C is, okay, if I want to make this house to where I live here long term, what does that look like?
Right.
And so once you have those 3 data points, then I think, and you consult the various different resources, a contractor, an architect, and a realtor, those are the things that I think will give you the data you need to make a decision that's best for you as the homeowner.
Yeah.
And again, I always say start with number 1, because that's usually the biggest limiting factor in somebody's decision. Because
where are you going to go?
Where are you going to go?
Where are you going to go?
Because if you're not limited by proximity to anything in general, you could go buy a new house, in another part of the valley. There are a ton of huge lots in Queen Creek and Gilbert and some other places.
Carefree,
if you want to go further north.
Far,
but you need to consider all the other ramifications, with that.
Yeah. Well, I think that was very well said, because summing it up in 3 things I think is helpful. And I think those are some great points. So I just have to ask you, just for the fun part of this podcast. So while you have been renovating, because not everybody is a builder who loves to renovate, and not everybody's a builder who should be renovating your house. But what's the craziest thing that you've bumped into? Like when you talk about things that you have to solve, like what's the craziest thing you bumped into?
We've had houses that had no structural support in the exterior of the walls, beams that weren't posted up underneath. So there was literally no structure holding the house up. And the crazy thing is, it's been standing for 30 plus years.
Wow.
And you're just like, well, according to the engineers today, this shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Like it should have fallen down by now. So you find stuff like that.
That's scary. That's very scary.
You also find trinkets that previous people have left you. In McCormick Ranch a few years ago, when we were demoing some walls, we kept hearing this clinking. And we couldn't figure out what was clinking. And once we peeled back another wall, what we realized was that somebody had fun and back in the 70s had taken all of their Coors Light, vintage bottle, they're vintage now, and they had lined the entire wall. Inside of the entire wall was Coors Light bottles. And it was just one of those funny things that you don't expect.
Yeah.
In Arcadia, we had found, it was early 50s house. Somebody had put vintage newspapers from the late 40s and through the early 50s in the walls. And they're just some neat random things you don't exactly expect when you do it. And we've always contemplated kind of doing funny things for other people that follow behind us, but we've never done it to this date. So
it's got to be something clever that you could come up with. Yeah.
We've come up with a couple clever ones, but we're afraid of giving people heart attacks. We've thought about hiding like a skeleton, like under a staircase, or something just funny that somebody wouldn't expect, and then they open it up.
Dinosaur
30 years.
bones.
Exactly. If they're open it 30 years from now, they're like, "Oh, what was that?"
Yeah.
So
that's fun. Well, it's awesome. So, I appreciate you sharing tips for all of us to consider when it comes to renovating a house. I really think this is going to be the name of the game of what's happening. I think these conversations are already happening. And I think the real estate community is already having some of these conversations with people too. So I think, aligning with some of those great real estate professionals too, to let you know availability. And I think it's going to be a very good decade or 2 for you.
I think it really will on the remodeling side, and not on the new build side, because there will always be people that want to take an old home, scrape it, and start over, and there's nothing wrong with that. The last parting gift I guess I would tell people is that it's always important to check out your general contractor. So register our contractors, do some due diligence. Don't just go to Instagram. Follow up with other sources, people that have used them or something else, because there are builders in Phoenix, and then there are builders in Phoenix, and I say Phoenix in general, just as the metropolitan. And the other thing is, if you're going to remodel, you want to make sure the general contractor you are hiring has a lot of remodeling experience. You don't want somebody, and there's nothing wrong with this, that has always built new houses throughout their entire career. There's nothing wrong with that, but they're 2 kind of different animals.
Right.
And so you kind of need somebody that has that background, or at least a diverse background, kind of like we do. Nance, GM Hunt, a bunch of us have been at Desert Star, Schultz, we've all been around a long time. And so we've all been through the weeds on new build, remodeling. And so you kind of know some things that maybe somebody else doesn't.
Yeah. And didn't we say, if it seems too good to be true?
It is.
Yes.
If it's, the age old thing that you get what you pay for, construction is 100% of that motto, because, sub bases and stuff are different. Newer builders are going to have newer sub bases. Not that that's bad, but sometimes they don't have the diversity of knowledge that, somebody else does that's been around for a while. So you're hiring experience. There's a reason that a lot of us have been around for 40 years, in a lot of cases or more. And a lot of us are second generation, so we've grown up. I mean, there are pictures of me when I was 6 years old crawling around in walls, sweeping for my dad. So, I mean, you start on the bottom and you work your way through. I mean, I've done it all. And so that diversity is what you're paying for, that diversity of knowledge.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. Well, good. Thanks for joining today. This is a good podcast. We're going to keep the conversation going.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's the pod. Thanks for joining me this week. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and hit the bell so that you never miss an episode. And for more about Iconic Life, please go to iconiclife.com. Until next time, I'm Renee D. We'll see you soon.